Now that we've completed the skinning process, we will start the fleshing process using a fleshing machine. There's a number of different bird flesh machines on the market. This particular one is from Van Dyke's. We're going to use a soft wheel. This one has done a couple of thousand birds, so it's very worn down, but it works very well. These fleshing wheels do come with a hard plastic top. We don't use that. We use either a piece of soft plastic or bubble wrap. It makes it a lot easier to clean up and keep everything more sanitary. As you can see, I'm also wearing a white suit and latex gloves. This is going to keep all the fat and grease off of my arms and off of my clothing and my hands. Now we're going to start the fleshing process. We'll turn the machine on. I like to use borax when I'm fleshing birds. You can use corncob grit or a mixture of the two, but I usually just use powdered borax. You can buy it from Van Dyke. We're going to put a liberal amount all over the bird, start to rub it in. That's going to provide traction for when we're using the wire wheel. It's also going to soak up some of the fat and grease from the bird as we're fleshing. So we're going to start fleshing the head area. I'm going to apply a light amount of pressure as I'm putting the skin onto the wheel. I'm just going to let the wheel do the work. You don't want to put a lot of pressure on this because you'll start to put holes into the skin. Pheasants are pretty strong skinned birds. Certain kind of ducks are a little bit trickier to do. A pheasant is relatively easy to use the wheel on. I'm just going to work all the way around the head. As you can see, it's taking all the meat and grease and fat right off the skin. You want to keep moving when you're doing this. You don't want to keep going over the same spot again and again because that will start to heat up the skin and that'll cause friction, which will heat up the skin and could lead to some feather loss. So you want to keep moving when you're doing this. As you can see here, we're starting to expose some of the feather quills that are on the top of the head. We want to remove all of the tissue from around those quills. Want to take care when you're fleshing around the eyes that you don't run through the eyes and start tearing up the wattles underneath. Flesh around the ear canals. There's usually quite a bit of meat around these ear canals. We will want to flesh all of that out. As you can see, we've removed all of the meat and tissue from around the ear canal. Now that we've fleshed out around the head, we want to start coming down the neck of the pheasant. If you remember, this pheasant had quite a bit of shot damage on the neck, so it's going to be a little bit more delicate to flesh. We can start to see some shot holes right here. And if we flip the neck around, we're also going to start to see some shot holes here. And right here, we want to be very careful when we're fleshing around these that we don't make those holes bigger than they already are. We're going to put a little bit more borax on here to provide some traction for the wheel. As you can see, we just fleshed around one of the shot holes. We just lightly went over it just to remove the meat and tissue from around it. If you feel the skin starting to heat up from the process, you can take your spray bottle with cold water and just spray that area down to cool it back down again. Again, if you let the skin heat up too much, or if you go over an area too many times, it could cause friction, which could start to heat the skin up and make the feathers start to fall out. So it's always important to make sure that the bird skin stays cool during the process. Now that we have the neck fleshed down, we want to start focusing in on these different feather track groups which run down the side of the bird. These are all the breast feathers. We're going to start fleshing these out to expose the feather quills. Put a little bit more borax on those. Going to firmly grasp it and start working it on the wheel. Doing short little strokes on the wheel just to remove the flesh from the quills. You can start to see they're starting to become exposed. Working our way down the breast. This is going to kind of give you an example here. You can see we have one side of this breast here fleshed. You can see all the feather quills, and this part is not. So this is the part we need to remove, and this is something that all the meat's been removed on. You want to take care when you're fleshing down this delicate skin area between these two feather groups. There is a little bit of meat there, so we just want to take our time and make sure we don't break through that thin skin. As you can see, we've removed all of the fat and tissue from around these breast feather quills. We'll now start working on the other side. Now that we've completed the other breast, we want to start fleshing down the back of the bird along these back feathers. We want to remove all this flesh and fat from these back feather quills, and then we'll come down and work on the vent area around where the tail was. So we're going to put a little bit more borax onto the skin. We're going to start up where these feather track starts on the neck and work right down the back. take your time when you're doing this. This isn't a race. Just make sure that you remove all of the fat and tissue from the quills. And try to avoid putting holes in if you can. If you do, don't worry about it. We can easily sew those up. The saying is, if you're not putting in holes, you're not a bird taxidermist, so you're going to get really good with needle and thread. You can see we've fleshed and removed all the fat and tissue from these back feather quills. We're now going to start working around the tail. To do that, we're going to grab onto the skin and bring it right onto the wheel. We'll flip the bird around and we'll start fleshing around the vent. We want to firmly grasp the feathers and the skin around the vent area and present this to the wheel. As you can see, we've removed all the flesh and tissue from those feather quills. We'll now start working on these feather tracks. We'll flip the bird over and repeat the process on the other side. You now want to come along the breast seam. There's a track of feathers that runs along both sides of the breast seam, and we want to remove all the tissue from that area. Again, when you're doing this, you want to make sure that you're pulling the feathers out of the way of the fleshing wheel. If you don't, these are going to get caught in the wheel and could rip the skin. So I'm going to pull these feathers out of the way and just present the skin to the wheel. Repeat the process on the other side. Now that we removed all of the flesh and tissue and fat from the body of the bird, we want to start on the legs. We would just simply run the bone right along the wheel, and that's going to pull all the meat that was left on right off. These little bit of tendons and bone fragments, we will simply take our scissors and just trim that out of the way. Repeat the process on the other leg. Now that we have the body fleshed out, we want to start working on the wing area. We're going to start by fleshing out the scapulary group of feathers. So you can see we've removed all of the fat and tissue from the scapulary group. All that's left is the feather butts. Now we're going to start working our way up the wing, removing all of this meat and fat tissue from inside these feather quills. You may have to apply a little bit more pressure to get in between these feather quills to remove all of the tissue. Flip the wing around, and we're going to remove some of this excess meat that's on the wing. You could scissor this off as well, but we're just going to use the wire wheel. Same with this meat down here. It's very important that you remove all of the fat and tissue from inside these quills, otherwise during the drying process that could start to rot if that's not removed and cause a very foul odor to come from the wing area. Now that we've removed all of the meat and tissue, we want to start cleaning up these wing bones. So just like we did on the legs, we're going to run the wing bones right along the wheel. And that's going to remove all of the meat and tissue. You want to make sure that you get in all the different parts of the wing joints, by angling the bone and forcing the wheel into those different areas. We'll use our scissors to just remove any extra little bit of tendons or tissue that may be left on. This wing bone has been cleaned and is now ready for the washing process. We will start on the next wing. Now that we have the bird fleshed down, we want to start the washing and degreasing process. To do that, we want to lightly dampen the skin of the bird. We're going to use a little bit of lukewarm water. Just going to put a small amount of water in here, just enough to dampen the skin. Get this water all over the skin. Now we're going to use Dawn soap. That's going to act as our washer and degreasing agent. We're going to pour a little bit right onto the bird's skin. Now I want to rub that onto the bird's skin and get in all of the feather quills. This is going to help remove any excess grease and start that degreasing process. Pheasants aren't as bad as ducks. Ducks are going to have a lot of greasy fat that's going to soak into the feathers, so it'll be a more elaborate washing process. Pheasants are relatively simple to do. Good bird to start with. Another thing that we can do if we want to make sure we've removed all of the grease and fat from the feather quills is take a wire brush. This is you can use a brass, a steel, or one of these black ones, and just kind of run these right through the feather quills. That's going to collect any additional fat or grease that may be caught in there. And you can go over the entire bird doing this if you want to. Now that we've completed that process, we are going to put a little bit more Dawn soap right onto the bird's skin. And we want to submerge this in lukewarm water. We're going to start to kind of agitate this around into the water, start to remove any grease or fat and clean up the skin of the bird. We're going to work this around into the water, just kind of rubbing the skin. Now that we have the skin side washed, we're going to pull all the legs out and the wings and reinvert the neck. Now we're going to agitate this. Now that we have the feather side out, we want to agitate the skin around. Now that we have the bird thoroughly agitated around, we want to pull it out. Drain off the excess moisture by squeezing out the water. Temporarily set this aside and do a water change. Rinse out your container to get rid of all the old soap and fat and grease that may be in it. Put in a small amount of dish detergent. Again, we want to use lukewarm water. We'll resubmerge the bird, and we'll let this bird soak in here for about 5 minutes. What that's going to do is dislodge any blood that might be dried onto the feathers and help to dislodge any grease or fat that might be trapped inside the feathers. Okay, so it's been 5 minutes. We've let the bird soak in the water. We're now going to squeeze out all this excess water. We're going to start the rinsing process. We're going to be using lukewarm water again, but we're not going to be using any soap, as we want to start removing the soap from the feathers. Resubmerge the bird, agitate it around. What we want to do at this point is displace all the soap from the feathers. You don't want to have any soap in the feathers when we start the drying process, otherwise the feathers will have a matted look. And we will just repeat this process as many times as necessary so that when we put the bird in, there's no more soap floating up on the surface. I would say at least 3 more times. At this point, after you have all your rinses completed, you can either freeze the bird if you're not going to mount it immediately, or start the drying process. If you are going to freeze it, wrap it up tightly in a plastic bag and zip tie it with a tag on it.